Hello, I'm Dr. Connie Mariano, and I'm a very proud alumna of a San Diego high school, Mar Vista High School in Imperial Beach. And I'm honored to be your speaker today to congratulate you on this tremendous honor as ASB Student Body Presidents to receive the Laurels of Leadership Award. And my brief presentation is, I like to call it Launching Leaders, because what you've accomplished in your achievements really prepares you for life in general. And I'm going to share with you a couple of things in this talk. So next slide, please. My goal is to be three things. Number one, to share my life journey, which I want to make it interesting. And the goal is to make it relevant to your life. The second is, what did I learn from the things that I've done in my life and how that applies to you? And the third is words of wisdom. What can you take to make your life better and to follow your path? Next slide. I always believe it is the journey that defines us, that we become the people we are because of the adventures we have in our life and the people who affect our lives and touch our lives. And I'm going to share with you how my life's journey has occurred. And the important thing is to take away, how does this apply to you? What can you take from this to add to your life as you launch your journey into leadership in life in the years ahead? Next slide. I started off not as a White House doctor, but as a little girl in the Philippines. My mother and father were born in the Philippines. My father was a Navy serviceman. He joined the Navy a long time ago. And this picture, I used to call my care photo. It's a care package photo that late at night, you'll see this black and white photo of these poor little kids in the third world country. Well, I'm this little girl in the third world country. I'm the second girl from the left. This was taken when I was 2 years old. And this was of my maternal grandmother and my three cousins. And it shows to me that we all have our roots. We all have our beginnings, and it can be as humble as can be. It doesn't matter where you were born or how you were born or under what circumstances. What matters is the journey that you take. But I also ask you to honor your roots, honor your heritage, no matter where you came from. And I know in San Diego, we have such diversity of people from all countries, a large Filipino segment, Chinese, definitely African Americans, everybody, Hispanic, Caucasian, we're the melting pot. And so honor where your people came from, your ethnic background, and take the best of that and make it great in this country. So what I tell about this story is it doesn't matter where you started. What matters is what you do and what you bring with you as you journey through life. Next slide. So I remember my most vivid memory is my 5th birthday in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. That's what I remember, just trying to fit in. And I don't know about you, but my struggle in life has always been, how do I fit in? And it was hard trying to fit in when you're the only girl in the group, or if your name and your face or your height, or there's something about you that's different. And here I was on my 5th birthday in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, naval housing. And I was trying to fit in with all the little neighborhood girls. And I didn't have the little cute freckles, but I had the little pink dress and the little barrettes in my hair. And I think the person who really didn't stand out the most was my brother here beside me, who's totally lost in this picture. He still is today a little bit. He became a nuclear power engineer, worked for the defense contract firm, is very super bright. But we look at how we go through life. And I think it's the ability or the challenge of trying to fit in. And I don't think that's such a bad idea, trying to struggle. But one of the things I'm going to share, next slide, is that when you're in a situation where you don't fit in, you got to realize in a lot of ways, that's a good thing. I've always struggled with being the underdog, always a person they underestimate. And I always believe that when you find yourself in a situation where you don't fit in or you stand out from the crowd, switch those words around, that you don't stand out, that you do stand out, but you want to switch them so that you are outstanding. And I grew up with the mantra, you're never good enough. I remember growing up, my parents didn't feel comfortable in this country when they first moved here. They didn't really feel embraced as American. And they felt, and they grew up, I grew up with the feeling, oh gosh, I'm never good enough. So I have to really, really try harder than anybody to make my voice be heard. Next slide. And so I made my voice heard through school. My parents couldn't afford to send me to private school. I went to public school. This was my high school graduation in Mar Vista High School, Imperial Beach back in 1973, long time ago. And I was a commencement speaker, and I was also the ASB student body secretary, and I was the editor-in-chief of the school paper. So I was all those things that I was striving for in my senior year in high school, and that was really a big dream of mine. But I think when your voice is heard, that's when you start to blossom. And I look at you as student body presidents and the things you've done, and your voices have been heard. So I want you to honor that and use that in the years ahead. Next slide. Many of you are going on to college, and I decided I would go to college and go on to medical school. Why did I pick medical school? My early career plans were several. First of all, I wanted to be a nun because my parents were Catholic, and I decided no, nuns couldn't date, so I couldn't be a nun. The other was I wanted to be a teacher, and I thought, okay, that would be good. And then finally, I was living overseas when my family was stationed overseas, and we had a career day where one of the doctors from the Navy hospital came to speak to us. He was a GYN, OB-GYN doctor, and he talked about delivering babies and how exciting it was to bring life into this world. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to be a doctor. I'll become a doctor. And so I told my parents, and they weren't very supportive because they knew they couldn't afford to send me to school, and I had to do it on a scholarship. But they said, it's up to you. If you wanted to do that, go ahead and do that, but you'll have to pay for it yourself. And I said, I understood that. Next slide. But I think now, as you're struggling to learn for a career, perhaps I hope you would go to college or go on to trade school or join the military. One of the things I'm going to plug now is healthcare and why that's a great move. More than ever, you're living in the pandemic. Your generation has faced the pandemic of 2019, 2020. Last time we had that was back in the early 1900s. So this is very life-changing. Your generation has experienced that. So if you ever wondered if biology or science has influenced society, now more than ever, you'll see the message how one simple virus can affect the way we live more than ever. So just keep that in mind as you try to figure what you want to do. If you love working with people, if you love science, consider going to healthcare. Next slide. From graduating at Mar Vista High School, I went on to get my bachelor's degree at University of California, San Diego, there in town, and then got a scholarship to the Uniformed Services University School of Medicine in Bethesda, Maryland. Next slide. So I stayed in the military 24 years. I hadn't planned to do 24 years active duty, and I'll tell you why in a second. But one of the things I learned about the military, first of all, they paid for my education. It was a full scholarship. In return, I had to pay them back over 10 years of active duty time, and I paid beyond that, and there's some benefits to that. I always believe it's a lot of their recruiting slogans. It's not just a job, it's an adventure. It's true. Not only did I get to be a physician, I got to be a White House physician. I got to be a leader, an officer, a doctor on board a ship. So it was plenty of adventure. You're never bored. Your income is stable. You get healthcare benefits. You get a lot of great benefits, but you also learn as much as possible. You're not restricted to one particular field, and you continue to learn wherever you go. It's true, you can be all you can be. And one of the things that you learn about the military is how to be a leader. Next slide. I'm going to share with you some of the things I learned about leadership through the military. And you probably believe this already because you wouldn't be a leader of a student body if you didn't know this in deep in your hearts. One of the things we believe in the military is the mission comes first. What's our task? What's our goal? What's our purpose? Are we going to have homecoming this year? What are we going to do with homecoming? How are we going to do the budget? What are we going to do for the sophomores and the freshmen? What kind of activities? What happens to the prom this year? What is our purpose? What are we going to do? How do you solve this? You as a leader have to focus on that. And now more than ever, focus on the mission. I know this is a tough time with division and polarity and people with personalities. Focus on the purpose, not the personalities. You're always going to meet people who disagree with you. Be respectful, be nonviolent, be considerate, but also speak your word as well. Next slide. The other thing we believe in is to follow the chain of command. There's an order of way things get done. That's how rules are. That's how rules are when you go to college. You have to follow rules to get your graduate degree. If you want to go to med school, you have to follow the rules to get into med school. In order to get past your medical boards, you have to follow several rules. Rules are everywhere, and especially more than ever in the military, we have rules. The chain of command is how you get things done. It's how you respect people in the higher ranking structure. There's a rank structure in the military. There's a rank structure no matter where you go in this life. The uniforms are different. In the business setting, it's corporate America, and they have different uniforms. They have business suits sometimes. They have black turtlenecks. They have certain offices they use, but it depends on the responsibility. Next slide. The third thing I've learned about the military is take care of your troops. You're only as good as the people who serve with you. As a retired Rear Admiral, I never said somebody worked for me. I always said they served with me. We worked together. As somebody who has higher rank or as a boss, you're only as good as the people who are in the field or in the trenches. As a doctor who owns a private practice, my business is only as good as the person who answers my phone, is only as good as the nurse who takes care of my patient, as good as the people who reach out to my patients who are an extension of me. So take care of the people who work with you because they reflect on you and your organization. Next slide. The fourth words of wisdom I share about leadership is don't burn your bridges. In other words, don't make enemies. You never know that the contacts you have today can help you later for a reason. I always keep in touch, believe it or not, with my high school classmates of over, my goodness, 30 some years ago. I keep in touch. You never know that that person you met in high school may one day marry you, which I did. My first husband was my high school sweetheart, or become a business partner or somebody you send business to or help you in your career. You never know when that person you meet can help you in some way or you can help them. So don't burn the bridges or contacts. Use them in the future. Next slide. The fifth word of advice I give that I've learned from military is serve a higher purpose. I'm going to share that in the next story, which I think is important. Next slide. People ask me, you went to Imperial Beach High School, Mar Vista. And my classmates will say, well, how did you wind up in the White House? You didn't go to any Ivy League high school. You went to this little high school in Imperial Beach. Who knows about Mar Vista, right? And this is the story I tell of how I wound up in the White House, serving 9 years as White House physician under 3 different presidents. I'm going to backlog history a little bit. The year was 1991, long time ago. I was living in San Diego, California. I was working in the Navy. I was stationed at the Naval Hospital in San Diego. I was married to my first husband. We had 2 little boys. And at that time, I was struggling with what to decide with my military career. I was at the Navy hospital working in a great job. I was during the day taking care of patients in clinic, rounding on the wards, taking care of patients. Late at night, I would come home, make dinner for my family, be there for my husband and my kids. And I was struggling because I thought, is that all there is to my life? Is there anything else I need to do? And I didn't know what to do. I was sort of lost. I didn't think I wanted to do that particular thing in the Navy all my life, working at the hospital. And so it so happened that my 9-year commitment to the military was almost over, and I had to make a big decision. I had to decide whether I wanted to get out of the military or stay in and make it a career. And I was struggling with that. And it so happened my husband was an attorney working in San Diego, and he said, listen, my law firm is going on a retreat to Palm Springs this weekend. Why don't we leave the kids with your mom and dad who live 3 houses down? And let's go to Palm Springs and you make your decision that weekend. And I said, oh, great idea. So that weekend, we're in Palm Springs, we're at a wonderful event. And I remember going down to the evening events, the dinner, to the grand ballroom at the fancy hotel. And as I walked down into the grand ballroom, my husband goes off to one side to meet with the other law partners, who were all men. And then I went to look for the wives, who were the wives of the law partners. And what struck me about the wives of law partners were that they were all tan, they were rested, they were relaxed, they had time for yoga, they had time for shopping, they had time to be with their kids, they weren't stressed out like I was. I was really stressed out. I was frazzled. I was probably burnt out. And so I had an epiphany. I had a last moment decision that I made as soon as I saw them. So I pull aside, I grab my husband, I said, I've made a decision. I know what I want to do next. And he says, what? I said, I will get out of the Navy. I finished my time. I'll get out. You make law partner and I will become a trophy wife. I want to become a trophy wife, just like these wives of the law partners. And he says, sure, go ahead and do that. So having made my decision, we had a great weekend. Monday morning, I was back at the Navy hospital, and I go down to the Office of Personnel. And in the military, you can't just say, I quit, bye-bye, I'm leaving. You have to submit the paperwork in triplicate. They send it off to Washington, D.C., and then 9 months later, they let you go. So I had the paperwork on my desk, I'm filling it out, and all of a sudden my phone rings, and it's my boss, the chairman of medicine, Captain Midas. And he doesn't know I'm trying to get out. He doesn't know anything about what I'm doing at this time, filling out paperwork, trying to leave. So he says to me, Connie, I just received the message traffic from Washington, D.C., and I'm to nominate 6 candidates for the position of White House doctor to represent the U.S. Navy. And I'd like to include you in the nominations. And I said, well, why me? He says, well, I have to pick 6 great candidates from the Navy, all with good records, which you have, board certified in internal medicine. You did time on board a ship for 2 years, got a great career. I want to nominate you, and I think you'd be a good candidate. I said, well, what does it entail? He says, well, you have to move to Washington, D.C. with your family. It's a 2-year assignment. You travel with the president, you take care of the president, the first family, you're on Air Force One, Marine One, Camp David. And after your 2 years, you're still in the Navy, of course, you're wearing civilian clothes, but after your 2 years, you can come back here, or you can be stationed in Hawaii or any place you want to go. I said, my goodness, that sounds like a great job. Let me ask my husband. So I hang up, I call my husband, I tell him all about this great opportunity to do a career change. And he says, are you crazy? You know very well, you hate Washington, D.C. You grew up there in the 1960s when your dad was stationed there. You know very well it's hot and humid in the summer. It's cold and miserable in the winter, but most important of all, they don't have good Mexican food like they do here in San Diego. I said, you're right. They don't have Mexican food like we do here. He says, plus you're going to get out. You're going to join a private practice group. You're going to get out of the Navy. You can stay here. You don't ever have to be stationed again. I said, you're right. You're right. He says, you're going to be a trophy wife, right? I said, yes. I'll tell my boss no. So I hang up. I'm getting ready to call my boss. And all of a sudden, my pager is vibrating on my desk. In those days, we didn't have iPhones. We had these old-fashioned pagers that will vibrate and just give you a phone number. So mine was vibrating on my desk. I look at it. It's my husband trying to call me. So I before I can even put that call through to my boss, I call back my husband. I said, what's up? I'm getting ready to call my boss to tell him no. He says, you know what? Hold off. He said, I came to realization that you'll never get this job anyway, but it's a good resume item in case you decide to work for Kaiser. So let me pull aside for those remarks. You'll never get this job anyway. Now, I always believe that the person who loves you always believes the best in you, should be your biggest fan. And that was a red flag to me that person I was with in my life was not my biggest fan. So I ultimately wound up leaving him about 13 years later and moved on and did find my biggest fan, who I married. But the 2 things I share, which a lot of people remember from this, are 2 things. The 2 most important things in your life. Number 1 is your life's calling, your life's mission. What are you meant to do in this life? And the second is, who are you meant to spend it with? Who is your life's partner? So my criteria for your best partner is the person who is your biggest fan, the person who brings out the best in you. So as my first husband told me, you'll never get this job anyway, but it's a good resume item in case you work for Kaiser. So I said, great, I'll go ahead and put my name in. I won't get the job, but I give it a chance. So I put my name in, and fast forward 9 months later, I'm at the White House being interviewed for this job. I'm walking around the White House corridors in uniform, and I'm looking at the 5 other guys who are competing against little old me. The 5 other guys are all good-looking guys, Naval Academy, SEAL team. They've got nice hair, nice teeth. They've got medals all over their chests. They're very proud. They're very bold. They all look like Tom Cruise into that classic movie, Top Gun. And all of them have connections in Washington, D.C. I have no connections whatsoever. So as part of the interview process, we all get interviewed by security because you have to have a top secret security clearance. And so I get interviewed by them. And then we each get interviewed by members of the White House medical unit team in the basement of the White House because it's high security. So we each get interviewed by the whole team of doctors, nurses, medics, administrators. It's a big grilling that they do, asking you lots of questions. And then each of us candidates among the six of us are getting interviewed privately by Dr. J. Burton Lee III, who at that time was a personal physician to George Herbert Walker Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, who was the first President Bush at that time in office. And he would be the patient we would be taking care of. So one of the things I did before my interview is I found out who would interview me. And I ask you that whenever you get interviewed, find out who's interviewing you and research them. If you're going to a company or a school or anything that interviews you, do your research, do your homework, find out what they're about, what their pet peeves are. So you try to find something in common with the person interviewing you, so you have some, commonality, you can talk about it. So I interviewed, I went online. They didn't have Google back then. I did a literature search on Dr. J. Burton Lee III to find out what we had in common. Well, we had nothing in common. He grew up one of those New England blue bloods, very wealthy family, had a home in the Hamptons and Martha's Vineyard, had gone to Andover with George Herbert Walker Bush, knew the president, first lady by their first name. So we had nothing in common. The only thing, I think the only Filipinos he knew were the guys in the White House mess where my people came from. So again, I was like the underdog. So as part of the interview, I get marched into the ground floor of the White House, which you see here. And the incumbent doctor, Dr. Al Roberts, brings me into the ground floor of the White House. He says, Connie, have a seat. I'm going to go introduce you to Dr. Lee before your interview. So I'm sitting there in my uniform, and the secretary sitting there at the desk is looking at me, and it's on the ground floor of the White House. And Dr. Roberts walks over to the other side. There's a doorway, and I can hear him talk to somebody on the other side. And he says, Dr. Lee, I have our next candidate here. And I can hear this male voice on the other side said, well, did you bring her binder with her resume with it? And Dr. Roberts goes, oh, I forgot it on the other side in the office, the old executive office building. And all of a sudden, I hear like books or a binder or something being thrown against a wall. There's a thud on the wall. And the voice goes really gruff. He goes, well, never mind. I'll make the decision without it. And Dr. Roberts pulls away from the door and he points to me and says, you're on. And I was shocked. I thought, oh my gosh, he's just upset the guy I have to interview with. That's not good. So I stand up, I take a deep breath. Before Amy Cuddy wrote that book about power posing, where you sort of center yourself and focus on your breath and calm yourself down, I wiped off my sweaty palms on my coat. And I said a silent prayer, because I always believe in prayer. And I said, dear God, if this is meant to be, show me a sign. So took the deep breath, asked God to help me, walked through the door. And as I walked into the office with Dr. Lee, I saw Dr. Lee right away. And he was about 60 years old at the time, very distinguished gentleman in a business suit. And he was bald, silver, a little silver hair on the side, but bald mostly. And I saw his face. And as soon as I saw his face, I saw the sign right away. And what it was a single tan Band-Aid right across his forehead. And I stared at it and I thought, that's the sign. He's human. He bleeds. Something happened. Something happened. And I realized at the time I was a mom of two little boys, and my mommy eyes told me, my goodness, he's got a boo-boo on his forehead. He's human. So he looks at me. I look at him. He shakes my hand, nice firm handshake, good eye contact. And he points to his desk in a chair right opposite side of the room. And he says, sit down, just like that, just like you're talking to a dog. I wouldn't even talk to my dog that way. So he says, sit down. So I walk over silently and I thought, my gosh, this guy doesn't even warm up. He just goes right into this. So I sit down, I wait for him to sit down first out of respect. He sits down, he looks right at me, stares right at me. And he goes, why do you want this job? Just launches right into my interview. Why do you want this job? Well, I had prepared all these responses that I thought he would want to hear. But because I saw the sign, I had nothing to fear. This is what I said. I said, Dr. Lee, it's payback time. And he looks at me like, what? I said, it's payback time. I owe a lot to the United States of America. My father was a poor man who was raised in the Philippines. He joined the US Navy. He became an American citizen. I was born on a Navy base. I was brought here when I was 2. I was educated in public school. I went to the military medical school on a scholarship. I've learned my career through the military, through the United States. I owe my life to this country. And if I can repay my debt by serving the commander in chief, that's what I want to do. So I look at Dr. Lee, he looks at me, and there's no expression on his face, no smile, no nod of his head, nothing. I thought, oh my gosh, that didn't go over well. A few seconds later, he asked me the next question. What can you do here? I look at him, I said, Dr. Lee, you see my uniform, you see the sleeve. I had this blue uniform. I had 3 gold stripes. You see the gold stripes on my sleeve? I'm a commander. The longer I'm in the Navy, the more gold they put on my sleeves, the more they put me behind a desk. I am not a desk doctor. I'm a trench doctor. You put me anywhere in the trenches, anywhere around the world, outside of a medical center, I can take care of patients. I know how to do that. He looks at me again. I look back at him, no response. I'm feeling pretty bad at this point. I'm getting no good feedback from this interview. So all of a sudden, he stands up right in the middle of my interview, and I stand up too. And he says, as far as I'm concerned, we can stop the process right now. And I thought, oh no, I totally blew this. This is like the worst interview. He said, I don't care who we're interviewing today or tomorrow. You've got the job. I'm going to tell Barbara Bush. He shakes my hand. He walks out the door across the hallway to the 2nd floor of the White House to tell the First Lady of the United States. I follow him out. I'm staring at him walking away. Dr. Roberts and the secretary are staring at me, looking at the watch going, that was really fast. What happened? I said, I think I got the job. And I did. So what does that story tell of the interview? I was the underdog. I came in. I wasn't expected to get that job. But because I spoke with my true, authentic voice, that was the voice I needed to use, not the voice he needed to hear, the guy interviewing me. Bert Lee was looking for a successor. He wanted somebody who would stand up to him and others because he knew that as a doctor in the White House, you'd have to stand up to a lot of pressure to do things other people wanted you to do. And it isn't only just at the White House, it's at other places. So he needed somebody like that. And interestingly, or maybe not interestingly, maybe the sign from God was a year and a half later, I had his job. I took his office and I was there for 8 years after he left. So that was the sign from God that I was meant to go there. Next slide. So I share that story because it tells you to speak with your true, authentic voice. What is it like taking care of the President of the United States? I tell people it is the most humbling job. People think it's glamorous. It is humbling. It's the only job that the secretary will call you and say, doctor, the president will see you now. You're waiting on the patient. You're on the first patient, who's the president. What do presidents want in their doctors? They want 2 things. They want somebody who's kind and somebody who listens. That's all. That's what patients want in their doctors. Mission and service are important. You go into that job to take care of your patient, not to be a political person. And I tell White House doctors after me, your job is to be a doctor, not the spin doctor. Next slide. Taking care of the President of the United States, you're on duty all the time. You're when he travels. One of the things we share about when we're with the president is we're in the kill zone, K-I-L-L. People don't realize it, or maybe they do. The president's always a target for assassination. Who responds in the case of an assassination is the White House doctor and Secret Service. Next slide. You also take care of the family. The president comes with his family, his cabinet, his staff, and it's like any other family, but it's magnified because it's under the glare of the cameras, and that's really tough. But I always say, people will say, well, what do you do if the president doesn't want to listen to you? Let's say you give him some advice and he won't listen. I said, well, you got to go to higher authority. You talk to the First Lady. So I've had the pleasure of taking care of 3 First Ladies in the past. And a lot of times they are the power behind the throne. Next slide. What did I learn from 9 years at the White House and 3 presidents? Next slide. You learn from your predecessors. And this slide is actually from one of my old TV shows, House, about an internist who didn't really have kind skills as a doctor. He'd probably be in big trouble nowadays if he tried to do the things he did in that show. But you learn from the people before you. If you're coming into a job or taking a position that in which somebody had failed, let's say they got fired, find out why they got fired, find out what they did wrong, and don't repeat it. That's like a big red flag. Don't do that. Find out what they did well and repeat it. Find out where they failed. It's very important. Learn from the people before you, okay? Learn from what their experience. Ask them if you could do this differently, what would you do? What would you do better? What would you avoid? They can give you a lot of information. And I tell all White House doctors, learn from the people before you, learn from the lessons, listen to people who came before you. Next slide. The other lesson I learned from the White House is listen to unexpected sources. At the White House, when they have administration changes, everybody from the prior administration leaves and a new group comes in. The only people who are constant are the military, the Secret Service, some of your civil service employees, and the housekeeping staff. Who stays there the longest? Your housekeepers, your butlers, the people who clean the floors, who do the laundry, who cook the food, your butlers and the servants. They call them servants, the people working there. So what did I do when I transitioned from one president to the other? I went to the housekeepers. I said, listen, I've asked one of them who was cleaning my office at the time, you've been here 30 years. You've been here through so many presidents. What do you recommend? And she told me, honey, you just take care of whoever lives in this house. Doesn't matter their political affiliation. You take care of the people. That's what I did. Next slide. If you want to make change happen as a leader in the future, one of the things people will try to tell you as they push against you is, we've always done it this way. In other words, oh, we can't do it your way because we've always done it this way. And so don't readily accept that as an excuse. If you are not comfortable with that, just say, really, has it worked? You ought to consider this way. So that's one of the words of advice I give when you're trying to change a system or a practice for the better. If you have ideas to make a change, question it. If you've always done it this way, has it worked for the betterment of everybody? Next slide. The final thing I share, having been at the White House, but I also believe in this, separate from where I've worked, is if you can strive to make better everything and everyone you touch, you would have lived a good life, right? Every person you encounter, every organization of which you're a member, how can I make this a better place? How can I make this a better person? How can I make their day? Wouldn't that be a great goal? Next slide. So my journey doesn't end at the White House because, you're still young. All of us are going to live long lives, right? Longevity goes 80s and 90s. Your generation will see people living in their 90s to their hundreds, as long as you keep your brain sharp and you take good care of yourselves. So after I retired from the Navy for 24 years, left the White House as part of that after 9 years, I moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, where I worked at the Mayo Clinic, taking care of a lot of patients. And then 3.5 years after that, I formed my own private practice, which is now 15 years old. I moved on, remarried. Unfortunately, that husband has passed away in an accident a year and a half ago. And you move on with life. And there's reasons for things in life, and it's what you grow, and it's about growth and moving on in your life's purpose. I published my book in about 10 years ago, The White House Doctor, which right now is being optioned to Hollywood. So keep fingers crossed. You might be seeing a television series based on that in the next couple of years. I do a lot of media work. In fact, you see me now broadcasting from the Voice America at World Talk Net radio studio here in Arizona. I do a monthly podcast live radio show for that series on the Empowerment Channel. It's my way to give back, but I also enjoy it. I can have interesting guests on board and spread good words of being positive and informational and ways to inspire other people. It's my fun time. So there are many things that we can do in our life. So as you look at the years ahead, don't restrict yourself to different things. Continue to grow. Next slide. I'm going to leave you with some prescriptions at the very end because I'm a good doctor. You've learned so much in your time in high school. And I think as being student body president, You've signaled yourself out. You've separated yourself from the group because you're a leader. You represent your student body. So you know what's like working with so many people, trying to get people to agree, getting things done, getting elected is difficult. And also you know a lot about communicating. You know about purpose. And now is what's next? Well, definitely the skills that you learned about and used as student body president, those don't go away. They stay with you. Use them, grow them in the years ahead. And as you do that, these are things I recommend you look at. What is your purpose, not only in your next couple of years, but in your life? Why are you here in this life? What are you meant to do? You know, obviously you have your career ahead. What do you want to do for a living? But the other question is your calling. How do you want to live? Why were you brought into this life? What is your purpose? Your career could be a doctor, which is my career, but my calling is communications. It's spreading a message somehow of hope and positivity to others. The other is make better everyone and everything you touch. The third is embrace optimism. People who are positive and optimistic do better than those who are negative. Be deliberately kind. They had a saying, random acts of kindness. Don't be random, just be deliberately kind to everybody. Just if you're a nice person, kind people, it'll be a better world for everybody. And you'll feel better too. There are good studies of increased endorphins when people are kind. What's important in life, and I can say this as being a doctor to many patients, I see them at the spectrum of life. I'm the last doctor for many of my patients. I sign their death certificates when they die in their 90s. And you look back in their life, what are things that are important? In the end, these are the things that are important. It's your faith, it's your family, it's your friends. It isn't the car you drive, it isn't the neighborhood you live in, it isn't your bank account. It's your faith, it's your family, it's your friends. Be good to yourself and also be grateful. Those are so important. Next slide. So in the end, I wanted to congratulate you again, student body presidents. I am so proud of you, and I'm proud to be part of your organization as somebody who's a graduate of a San Diego high school. So best of luck, congratulations, and God be with you. Take care.